There we go. It's on air. Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the BrickCityBlockade.com podcast network. That's right, we have a special little panel this morning for all you folks out there who love talking about Star Wars, talking about everything that envelops that galaxy far, far away. And sitting on the other side of New Hampshire, ready to talk about some very interesting subjects, is Mr. James Brown. James, how's it going this morning, my friend?
Pretty good, man. We were just talking about 5:30 in the morning, what you were doing at 5:30 in the morning. I had my head tilted back and I was making noises not unlike a rather large vehicle. But yeah, no, not bad, man. I've got my coffee and I'm good to go.
Yeah, that's funny because I recently sent you the trending, which I feel Star Wars is going to be trending with this meme pretty soon, of BB-8 from the latest Resistance episode when he falls on his face, and it's when you when you haven't had coffee at 10:30 a.m. and it's just his face completely flat on the ground, and I feel like James, you and I are very similar when it comes to that, but I don't know about the other man across the pond, actually a couple ponds, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean over in Japan.
Depending on which way you go.
Depending on which way you go. It's Mr. Dave Hackerson himself back on the podcast. Dave, how's it going, my friend?
All right. It's been a second day of our 3-day weekend here because tomorrow's national holiday in Japan. So pretty happy about that.
Oh, you can't beat that at all, man. The 3-day weekends are absolutely perfect. Now, kind of the idea around this episode today was actually motivated by Mr. Dave Hackerson himself. And he recently, Sean and I actually sat down on an episode of the Home Show, and we were breaking down some stuff about Luminara and Barra and we really got into Ahsoka and the entire envelopment of the Force and what it truly means and how does it affect these characters. And Dave, you spoke in actually a very, very intriguing message to us about how, and one thing that you always do is the tie into the Japanese culture, to Japanese history and everything. And I absolutely loved reading. And this morning I spent some time. You talked a little bit about the Force, and you talked about the fusion of Buddhism and old Shinto and Japanese history, and how the interpretations of both and the connections, the Force is very similar in that way, that there is this balance, but one can kind of bring it out into a different direction, if you may say, or it can be seen in a different light. I'm going to have you talk about that because it's very fascinating.
Yeah, sure. Before I came to Japan, I knew there was Shinto and Buddhism, but I thought they just were their own separate thing, and it wasn't until I lived here for nearly a decade, and I started talking with one Japanese friend, and he taught me this word Shinbutsu Shugo, and I was like Shinbutsu Shugo, and then it's like, so how do you write that in kanji? And he writes it out, and I was like, oh wow, that's really interesting. So you have Shin for Shinto, Butsu for Bukkyo or Buddhism, and then Shugo, which is the characters for like concentration and to meet. So you have like Shinto and Bukkyo coming together. So when I started studying the languages, Japan's original religion, before people, we had different waves of people coming from the Asian continent. And the first peoples who came had very similar animistic religion, much akin to Native Americans. And that was the basis of Shinto, where you believed that there was a divinity and something divine in everything around you. And then later you had groups of people coming through the Korean Peninsula, and they brought Bukkyo and more of agricultural society. And so rather than like rejecting Buddhism outright, you had this really interesting acceptance. Okay, well, we'll just accommodate it. So Shinto was, it didn't really explain like intellectual stuff. It was more about just the mysteries of nature. And then Bukkyo, well, Buddhism was this nice complement that did more of the philosophical parts and more of like the greater universe. And so you had this accommodation and acceptance, which basically maintained this really cool symbiotic relationship. Like you had temples and shrines, but they were kind of always joined together. And like the temple behind my house, there's this massive tree, and in front of the massive tree, they have this like little Shinto shrine thing, and that's kind of a leftover from that period. And this continued from like about the time, well, let's see, Buddhism got established in around 7th century, And this continued all the way up until the 19th century. In the 19th century, when Japan decides to modernize, they take Shinto, instead of having the old style Shinto, they try to make it a state religion with the emperor at the head. And when they
Mm-hmm.
did that, they have this order go out. It was called, I don't know how to say it in English. In Japanese, it's called Haibutsu Kishaku,
Mm-hmm.
which literally you break it down and means get rid of Buddhism. And so
Wow.
you had this huge movement where people actually got carried away and they went and they ransacked temples, and you have like all these statues that had their heads cut off, and then later they were put back on, but they kind of went way too far with it. But you had everything going to get everybody together on the same page and create this new national identity centered around the new state Shinto with the emperor at the head. And this is where a lot of that World War II stuff eventually comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this one Japanese scholar by name of Seigo Matsuoka said this like left a huge, almost irreparable wound in the Japanese psyche. And
Interesting.
so he said, you're taking those two apart. It's like even today is almost taboo to talk about it. People don't talk about it enough. But so reflecting on that and then hearing all this talk about the Force and whatnot, I kind of thought, well, this is really interesting because before Jedi and Sith came out, you just had Force users, and so the Force users are taking all these aspects of the Force, and so they're just like the way Shinto accommodated Buddhism when it came to Japan. They're just accommodating every aspect of it, and then
Mm.
suddenly one day, I mean, who knows how they decided? One person's like, no, we got to just stick with this certain element. And then
Mm.
maybe in the Birth of the Jedi, it's like, okay, we're just going to focus on this one and we're going to get rid of that. And so suddenly, instead of having this accommodation of all different sides, it's a rejection of one thing. And just how in Japan, when they kind of split those two and this kind of create this little um, dissonance within the psyche, I was kind of thinking, well, that's an interesting historical analogy that you could apply to Star Wars in the way that the birth of the Jedi Order, or then maybe the birth of the Sith, and how each one of them is rejecting outright the other side rather than trying to find an accommodation that had previously existed. So,
Mm.
I
That's
mean,
what that.
I couldn't write all of that in a single mail, but that's where my mind went off
Yeah,
after listening to your discussion and then reflecting on this type of stuff. So.
yeah, no, it's a really interesting point. And James, when Dave talks about this kind of stuff, and I know you and we really like to dig into the Sith lore and the lore of the Jedi and everything. So, James, in my perspective, a lot of what Dave has talked about and the rejection when we see the split of the Jedi and the Sith, then you see the Jedi finding that there are individuals who are balanced. They have an even balance of dark and light. The Sith are finding individuals in legends and whatever else that there's a balance between light and dark inside of individuals, and they cast them off in the Star Wars universe. You're either Sith or you're Jedi. You're either dark or you're light at that time. And James, I think what's fascinating about this is kind of connecting that to what we see in more modern times between Rey and Ben Solo. They both have their even balances. And now we're seeing this kind of interesting pathway form based kind of like what you said, Dave, this progression over time where this split happens, but there are individuals within it. So, James, going to you on this, I feel like there is this change coming in the Force where it once was that split, but now it's coming together, and there are individuals who are balanced on both sides. And I think that in all perspectives of Star Wars going forward, these individuals are going to be so important to the story.
Now, the theology of Star Wars has always been fascinating to me. Where you go from pretty much every religion over the expanse of human history has the same basic thematic elements of balance, light, dark, good, evil. The Force is absolutely no different. But when you get to the Eastern religions, Buddhism, Shinto, Taoism, there's always the talk of, Hinduism as well. the talk of enlightenment, and enlightenment is someone who has found not necessarily a balance within themselves, but also a balance within the world around them, and a way to incorporate the world around them into their very existence, which is where you get the myths along the old man sitting on top of the mountain, which is who just sits on top of the mountain and dispenses wisdom to people who come up, and that's meant as an analogy of one who has found that balance and that enlightenment. And yes, I completely agree that Star Wars tends to draw a lot from what I've seen, from the fact that I dabble in mythology, and you know me, I'm a gigantic bookworm.
Very true.
And they draw very heavily from what I understand of Eastern religions, and Dave, fully admittedly, my knowledge of Japanese history, as far as I know, it goes modern, World War II, samurai, and then before that, I don't really know what was going on over there.
Yeah,
it's
pretty complex.
yeah, and it's that whole area of the world is, and this is no pun intended, so completely foreign to us. Um, Especially with us living on this side of the planet, knowing, European history and American history and all that. A lot of Americans don't really know, and a lot of the English don't really know what was going on in Japan and China from, you know, whatever BC up through, the fifth, sixth, seventh centuries. And I like the fact that Star Wars draws on some of those elements to tell its own story. And you see that evidence in the names, in the places, and the fighting styles, and the dress.
Oh yeah.
And it's rampant throughout Star Wars. And I think they did a fantastic job with that.
Yeah,
I realize I ramble.
No, they really do, and it's like, I mean, just obviously the name Jedi comes from the Japanese word Jidai, which is inspiration from not just Kurosawa, but there's the whole genre of Jidai Geki movies in Japan, which are the period pieces, and then you have like, well, just some of the names make me laugh, like Tano, Ahsoka Tano. Tano is a Japanese last name. And Honda Onaka, it's taking two Japanese last names, putting them together to make a guy's name. One name that made me laugh was Sabine's friend in Rebels. Her name is Ketsu. And Ketsu in Japanese means rear end. It's slang for rear end. So, all right, I could say the other word, but
right.
But no, like
Tookus.
with the whole history thing, like, I mean, basically when it comes to Asia, China, I mean, the name China means the flower in the center of the world. That's what they call themselves. And so China, I mean, if you know that why China is so bent on like becoming a premier world power today, it's because they were always the top dog in Asia.
Oh, yeah.
And so everything in Asia they thought revolved around them. So like the name Japan is Nippon, which literally means Hinomoto, or where the origin of the sun. So some people like, well, that's like a very nationalistic name, but it actually isn't. It's basically from China's perspective, when they look to the east, oh, we see these islands over there, and over those islands, that's where the sun comes up. So we're just gonna, that's where they're the land of the rising sun, because we look over there and that's where they are, but we're the center. And but what's really cool is like the culture that Buddhism wasn't from China, it came from northern India, but it went through Tibet and then got filtered through Tibet, and so it got this kind of really mystical aspect to it. And then you had this guy who came. There's many different waves of how Buddhism came to Japan. There's different forms that came over, and what I think is really cool is there's a lot of, I mean, a lot of people think, oh well, Zen is very present in the Force and like Qui-Gon Jinn, and there's some really cool phrases that Qui-Gon Jinn says, like focus on the moment, focus on the now. And there's a Buddhist, I actually bought this book. It was called Zen and Star Wars, and this Buddhist priest broke it, like all these Buddhist phrases down and how they relate to certain scenes in Star Wars. And one, he didn't say it in reference to Qui-Gon Jinn, but there's this word called nikon,
Mhm.
and it literally means like live in the now. And I read that and I was like, well, that's Qui-Gon Jinn. I mean,
Yes.
it's right
Yeah.
there, live
To
in
a
the
T.
now. And so that's the Zen part of Buddhism, and the Zen is more associated with the Bushi samurai, because they had to have the right frame of mind, because their
Mhm.
whole existence, much like samurai, was they're just warriors and they're protecting, and they have to be prepared at any moment to pass on. Whereas before Zen, you had something that was called Shingonshu. Shingonshu is a form of Mikkyo or esoteric Buddhism, and that's where I think a lot of the cooler mysteries of the Force fall in line with this esoteric Buddhism. Whereas you like Yoda or like some of these other more like Jedi who go for balance, you go out, you go away from society, you go out into nature, you go wandering in the mountains, and you're more in tune with like the living force. And this is where there's no clear line between this like Mikkyo and then some of these other more religions native to Japan. And that's why that was one of the first forms of Buddhism to come in here. And it was also one of the first that made it really easy to accommodate. Same with Zen later on. And when Europeans came over, and you have like the Jesuit Catholic priests
Mhm.
trying to proselytize here,
Yeah.
and so they tell them this whole Christian worldview, and these Buddhist guys are like, what?
That's kind of narrow.
they're like they're like, why do we have to limit ourselves to this? And then and this like and then on the reverse side is like they're just like these European Jesuit priests are like, what's the purpose of Zen? And then it's like, it's to become nothing. And they're like, well, everything's got to have a purpose. And they're like, no, the purpose is nothing.
Mm.
The purpose is nothing. And this is like they just couldn't wrap their head around it, because this form of nothing is, it's really hard to say in English, because
Mm.
we equate nothing as with a negative, and they're like, no,
Right.
actually nothing is good, because it means you're beholden to no form,
Yep.
and so you can go with the
Well,
flow,
that's why the
adjust with
number zero didn't have any existence till it came out of the Eastern world.
exactly. And so that's where the more I read about the character Qui-Gon Jinn, the more he's probably my favorite Jedi, because he's all about
Mm.
that. He's all about, no, we just have to go back to nothing.
Mhm.
Like the age, I really, really like the Age of the Republic comic
Mhm.
with Qui-Gon Jinn, because the whole time he's questioning this. He's like, why are we here on Coruscant? Why do we do this? We don't need
Yeah.
this. Let's just strip all this away. We can strip it all away and get back to zero.
I
And
gotta
so
look this up.
I just having all this exposure to this stuff here and having to take it upon myself to see the other side of the world this way, it's brought a whole new perspective onto characters like Qui-Gon Jinn that I don't think I
Yeah.
would have ever had I just stuck exclusively to. And I mean, I don't say it that Judeo-Christian is bad or anything, but just
Mm.
it wouldn't provide me the extra context to look at these things that some people are like, well, this doesn't make sense. And I was like,
Mm.
you don't have all the pieces to maybe create a bigger picture to bring in the clarity. But
Right. Right.
that's just it's it's really hard to. Some of these things I'm trying to take out of an non-English context and say right now, it's just kind of messing my head up.
No, it's funny, and I'm so glad you bring up Qui-Gon Jinn, because literally after Sean and I recorded that home show episode this past week, we had at least an hour and a half conversation about Qui-Gon Jinn. And it's funny because he wasn't even like a main topic in there. Most of that was about Ahsoka and Barriss Offee and Luminara, but there's just was this whole conversation, and you're so right. It's like where Yoda and the rest of the Jedi Council was able to move into this very traditional direction, Qui-Gon was never afraid to say, but let's start questioning things. Let's truly break it down in terms of, is this the best pathway for every individual? Is this going to make the most sense? Like we said here, zero is something. That connection to nature does mean something. And Qui-Gon always kind of pushed that forward. And I think his transition into the Force truly spoke to that, was that he was able to accomplish something that previous Jedi were not able to, because I feel like they got clouded by this one perspective, where Qui-Gon, in many adaptations, brought that about with Obi-Wan in his teachings, that this is truly the pathway. But it's if you truly believe in it. You have to believe in it, and you have to almost clear your mind to be able to fork your way through these different levels of understanding. Buddy. Essentially. And it's fascinating to see that progression is happening. And Master and Apprentice, the novel from Claudia Gray, I can't say enough. I cannot wait. And Dave, like you said, I would love to see more of that spoken of. Like the Age of Republic comic it was great. And I think that could be continued forward a lot more.
It's too short. It was too short.
It really is.
Before even that, did you guys ever read I think it came out when I was like 14, 15 years old. So Dave, I have no clue how old you are.
I'm 37. I'm 37.
All right. So probably when you were, so you're about 8 years older than me. So probably when you were in your late teens, it came out. It was the Jedi Apprentice series that just followed Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan around on their adventures prior to Phantom Menace.
I didn't read any of those books. I read the one about Darth Maul doing some missions on Coruscant.
They are terrible. I'll put it that way. First of all, they are horribly written. They're your typical like Penguin Scholastic, young adult novels that they mass produced and rolled off.
Yeah.
But the one thing that it did was it gave me a lot of it gave a lot of depth to the character of Qui-Gon before he really had a depth of character. Right around when Phantom Menace came out, and they were just like, "Oh my God, Qui-Gon got killed off. Everybody loved him. Holy shit! Nobody was expecting everybody to love Qui-Gon this much. We got to do something with him." And he does constantly through those books attempt to teach a very young, unruly Obi-Wan about balance. And all I'm hearing throughout this entire conversation is his lines from those books, just being like, "You're too reckless, Obi-Wan," and stuff like that. It's absolutely fascinating to get the input from somebody who's on the other side of the planet and understands the culture over there and can see these correlations directly. And I'm loving this right now. I wish I didn't have to leave soon.
What you said earlier about the whole enlightenment, I mean, in a way, you could say that Qui-Gon's the first to. Well, there's a Japanese word for it. It's called satori, and I think some people, it might be a fairly common phrase even now for people who know Buddhism. But satori is the word for enlightenment, and I love how it. The verb phrase is satori o hiraku, like it literally means to open up enlightenment or something. And I think that's kind of what Qui-Gon did, is he's always in this quest. And when you do Zen meditation, what you're told is to literally clear your mind of everything. And there's different ways to do that. You can concentrate on a sound, you can concentrate on just your breathing or something, but you try to get anything in your mind out. And I think Qui-Gon was always trying to do that. I mean, he's telling him, to clear your mind of all these thoughts. And in his quest to do that, the reason he was able to go on is part of the forces. I think if you apply this Satori concept, he gained enlightenment. And what was the enlightenment? That you can become part of the cosmic force and live on. And he was only able to do that because he cleared his mind of everything.
Right.
And let go of all those well, the dogmatic fixations on things have to be this way, things have to be this way, and
That's extremely, at least in my mind, analogous to modern religion in and of itself. That the art of enlightenment and transmitting your soul after death to be able to become one with the living force, or enlighten yourself to the point where you can commune with the living force, after having been subjected to this dogmatic and very structured religious society, is an excellent analogy for what's happening in the religious world now. So Qui-Gon's kind of like the not necessarily. He's like the Star Wars Dalai Lama. Like he's the one who's like kind of closest to achieving true enlightenment, and at least by those in the upper tiers of Jedi society, Yoda and all them, he's viewed as somebody who is very enlightened and very able to pass that teaching on to others.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Yoda recognized it. I don't know if the other council members were as open-minded as Yoda was. I always kind of...
No, we don't see any of them come back as Force ghosts, do we?
No, we don't. We don't see any of them come back as Force ghosts. And the only ones to come back are Obi-Wan and Yoda, and that's because of Qui-Gon. And yeah, I always... Looking back now, the more I go back and watch the prequels, the more I feel like Yoda's trying to... He's walking a very thin line, because he, in this kind of this notion was reaffirmed for me when I read the Age of the Republic comic, is that he's really intrigued by what Qui-Gon's saying, and he's been around for 900 years, so he's seen a lot. He's seen how Jedi Orders change. And so he's like, there's some merit to what Qui-Gon's saying, and we need to pursue this. But he has to save face as the head of the council. And he has everybody else who's like, well, this is what we've been doing. We have to do it this way.
Right.
And so he's always kind of forced to compromise. And then, especially with somebody like Mace Windu, that's a hard person to compromise with.
That's true.
And so I think once, I mean, it's tragic the Jedi Order went crashing and burning the way it did.
Mm-hmm.
But once all
I don't think the Jedi were the good guys. I wasn't sad to see him go.
Obi-Wan, then and you start seeing Yoda walk that past the lost episodes of the Clone Wars, where he goes on a little kind of vision quest, if you would say it, through the Force. And then he starts doing this stuff on his own. And then once everybody's out of the picture, then he can really focus on it. And then he gets Obi-Wan. Right, hey, Obi-Wan, I learned all this. And Obi-Wan's just like, where did this come from? And he's like,
right.
Yeah, we did.
Hold
really
up, Yoda. You're going too fast.
It was never there. What are you talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, it's that's the whole Yoda's relationship with Qui-Gon, especially their conversation Age of Republic comic, really showed a new side to Yoda for me, that he was, everybody's always like, Master Yoda, you look so tired, and well, I can see why he's so tired.
Mm-hmm.
He's trying to save face with these people, but at the same time inside he knows Qui-Gon's right. We need to reassess, and I think, well, we don't know what Ahsoka's fate's gonna be, and I believe she's gonna become a Force ghost.
Yeah.
I mean, if she didn't, it would be really strange, because she's, I think, the most. I mean, she doesn't say she's a Jedi, but she's.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, she isn't.
Rey should strive to be.
Yes.
If Rey knows of Ahsoka's existence, we don't know that yet.
Wow, that's a great perspective on it too. I mean, we don't know necessarily, Dave, where Ray is heading because
No.
she was so convinced that she could turn Ben Solo in The Last Jedi. She was so convinced because, and I think that there's the Last Jedi novel from Jason Fry does a really nice job of really digging in deep between what the conversations between Luke Skywalker and Rey were like on Octu. And I think that that whole concept of Luke Skywalker being a legend and that she probably had heard stories about how Luke had gone to his father and had tried to turn him back. And I'm sure that a lot of that in The Last Jedi, she was like, well, Luke's a legend. He was able to do it. What's saying that this pull that I'm feeling isn't going to allow me to do that? And like you said, this is where Ahsoka, I think, fits in perfectly, is because she had to deal with everything with Anakin. She had to see the changes before her very eyes and had to face them again at one point. And I think that that's exactly what Rey needs because of Ahsoka's influence. And if she doesn't become a Force ghost like you, Dave, I would be very surprised. She has taken on a very different pathway that I agree with you. I think that there's a lot of connections to what Qui-Gon's teachings were within that. And I don't know necessarily if Rey is able to take that path successfully, or is she going to be pulled in a very different direction and is going to need some true, almost mentoring just through whether it's, I don't know if Leia speaks to her a little bit, or there's something there. I don't know what it is, though. I think that there is something.
Well, I mean, the whole original trilogy, Luke meets Obi-Wan, and then Obi-Wan is quickly taken from him. But
Right.
he has Obi-Wan continue to revisit him when, I mean, of course, part of it's a vehicle for moving the plot along, but it's also a really nice way of having a presence to teach Luke, so Luke's not completely on his own. And I mean, you could use Luke, even though he's passed on now, he could be like, in this final episode, be like an Obi-Wan figure. He shows up to Rey at times to give her advice. I mean, who knows, we might see him sit down and have like a campfire chat with her, just like Obi-Wan did with Luke in Return of the Jedi.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that would be a really nice way of giving her guidance and advice. I mean, we saw Luke consult with Obi-Wan there about what he should do in regards to confronting his father.
Right.
But there's just so many things wide open. I'm trying not to speculate too much because I don't want to set myself up thinking one certain thing and then when
right
and having it be completely unlike what I was expecting. So I kind of shut those thoughts off as soon as they come up. But
gentlemen,
now I think in Ahsoka's case, she went further than Qui-Gon. And the reason I say that is she left the Order. She just walked away.
Right.
And we never saw Qui-Gon, even with all of his doubts. He could have. There was opportunities for him to walk away.
Oh, yeah.
He never did. So that's another reason why I kind of hold her above pretty much everybody else, because she just like, no, this is all a bunch. It's a farce. You guys are a farce. And I'm
gentlemen,
gonna just.
I hate to do this, but I gotta go.
Yeah.
All right, James.
Time for me to get to work.
All right.
Yeah, I got that wonderful thing that I got to do called feeding the family and stuff. So,
I understand.
Dave, absolute pleasure, man. I would love to discuss all of this with you at further length, much further length, and much more in depth, because I'm tearing myself away from this conversation right now.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, you some of the stuff you said, you were right on about a lot of stuff. So it was.
As I like theology and mythology, and I've gone over a lot of it, and I've definitely seen some patterns there. So, but I like to go straight to the experts with that if I can.
I wouldn't call myself an expert. I just read a lot.
Well, I'm about as layman gets. So, you know. All right, guys. Y'all have a wonderful day. Robin,
You too,
Have
sir.
fun. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. I wish I could stick around.
Absolutely, man.
Take
May
it
the force
easy.
be with you.
放送ともにあらんこ
That too.
と。This force
Die Frage ist nicht. Danke.
Hi.
Oh man, good old Mr. James Brown there checking out here on our special podcast. Man has to get off to work. He's got to take care of all that business that we call making the moolah. But anyway, no, it's fascinating, Dave, too, because and it's funny because I was just recently speaking to John Bishop Jr. from Making Star Wars, and
I heard your conversation.
yeah, and one of the things that we kind of talked about was a lot of the stuff with Episode 9, and like we always do, you don't want to speculate too much, like you said, but there is this fascinating twist in the Force that I feel. I don't know how you feel, but when we look at specifically Ben Solo, and we see this pull that he's feeling from the light to the dark, and Snoke feels it, and I totally believe Leia knows it exists somewhere in there. And one of the recent theories that I've kind of been hypothesizing on, and I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, if I can get Dave on an episode, I'd love to throw this over to him and see what he thinks. But it's really everything that happens after Return of the Jedi with Luke and Leia. I feel like there is stuff that we haven't been told just yet about Luke teaching Leia a little bit more about the Force. I think that's kind of been solidified a little bit with what we saw in Last Jedi when we get that Mary Poppins scene, as everybody likes to call it, and she's pulling herself back into ship. And I feel like there's something in there that's going to really explain how Ben Solo has so much of a pull from the light and the dark. And I'm wondering, I'm going to throw this to you. My theory is around that when Luke was not necessarily training Leia, but trying to connect her more with the Force, the brother and the sister, truly trying to find that balance and trying to teach Leia that you have this too. He says that directly. You have that power. You have that power too. And I feel like Leia may have felt a little bit of the dark side within her. And that there could be something in there that might be creating that pull. Luke was exposed to that at one point.
Yeah, as much as Luke was quick to act, and they always said that he was much like his father, I always thought that there was a little bit of a, I would say, a dark side to her, but there was this element about Leia I thought was really mysterious, and then of the two twins, I actually thought she was the stronger of the two.
Right.
Not just I mean, in force sense, but character wise, and that I associate. I mean, it's obviously a very strong reflection of her mother, and I think she may have been aware of some of those. I mean, it's for lack of a better expression, demons within her. And I mean, I haven't read those novels, the Aftermath trilogy, but from what I've heard, a lot of people discuss them, and she even when she's pregnant with Ben, she could sense that
Yes. Yep.
that darkness within her, and I I kind of think that she, from what I've heard people discuss, I don't know if she ever said this, but my take is that she was very well aware of those demons inside of her. And maybe one reason she was reluctant to fully commit to the training that Luke was trying to extend to her was the fact that she was afraid she wouldn't be able to control herself. She might go down a path like her father. And then because of that fear, she's afraid that she wouldn't be able to guide her son properly.
Right.
with that power that she was afraid to use herself. So she goes to Luke because I mean Luke he basically went right to the edge of going off into the dark side, but he didn't. He pulled back and didn't kill Vader. But maybe Leia's like, well, if Luke can stop himself, then he can stop my son from going over the edge. And
Right.
it's really funny because it's a decision motivated by fear.
Mhm.
And fear of the outcome. And it's the fear of the outcome that makes you do this decision, thinking that you're going to avert it. But in the end, the outcome you feared comes to pass because you
Right.
made that decision out of fear. And this actually dovetails really nice to this tweet. This Japanese guy I started corresponding with towards the end of last year. He tweets a lot of Star Wars stuff in Japanese, and so I was tweeting back. And he wrote today, actually, I thought this was really, really cool thing that he said. He wrote in episode 1, when Yoda tells Anakin that fear leads to the dark side, it actually wasn't Anakin who was afraid, but the people who were most afraid were Yoda and the Jedi Council. They were afraid of Anakin's power. And that fear of Anakin's power is what eventually led him to become Darth Vader.
Mm.
And so, in a sense, the Jedi Council were responsible for their own demise, is what he wrote. And I was like, that's a really good take, because again, here it is, it's fear. And so the irony that we see keep repeating over and over is that you have Yoda tell Anakin, fear leads to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so the very, very first fear leading to horrible consequences, that the Jedi Council look at Anakin, they see fear, they fear his power, so they're trying not to get him trained as a Jedi for fear that he will eventually go to the dark side and destroy them, which he does.
He does. That exactly.
But it's their decision to initially reject him and not train him is motivated by fear. Then next we come to Anakin. Anakin is seeing these visions of his mom dying. So he's afraid she's going to die. So he convinces Padme to take a little field trip to Tatooine.
Right.
It doesn't stop the demise of the mother. Then next, he's having dreams about Padme possibly childbirth. So he's motivated by fear again.
Right.
To do something to avert that outcome. But the outcome he wished to avert comes to pass anyway because he acted out of fear. And then now, when you get to with Ben, both Luke and Leia, perhaps she's afraid of the power within her, so she doesn't want to train herself, and passes that burden off to Luke. Luke senses the darkness growing in Ben. He's afraid that he's going to go and do a whole bunch of bad stuff, so he has that one moment where he loses his rationale, his reason.
Yeah.
He goes to... I mean, we still don't know what the real version of that story is.
Right.
What we do know is that out of fear, Luke contemplates an action to avert an outcome. But the outcome he wishes to avert ends up coming to pass for the explicit reason that he acted out of fear. We see this.
If it makes you feel better, I came back to this conversation out of fascination,
so
not
I think
fear.
You're on to something. So I would agree. Sorry, it took a long time to.
No, it's exactly what it's exactly what you hope for when you propose a theory, is that you kind of look at it from that broader perspective. And I think that there's a lot of people, even when it comes to Dave, and I'm sure we see this across Twitter, everybody posts a theory and they just leave it where it is. And sometimes it just needs that extra bit of information to coincide with it. It just needs some of that connection that, is is going to take that theory to the next level. And you did that exactly. You took that theory that I had, and to be honest with you, you actually even made it more believable in my mind, which is thank you, by the way. And
No problem.
and
I have to thank that Japanese guy for the tweet later.
yes, absolutely.
I mean, because when I read that, I was like, dude, I have thought the same thing before.
That's what's so beautiful about it. And yeah, there's something in there, and I don't know whether that story is ever going to be told. And I would love to see that in either comic book form or novel form, and we see what Luke is experiencing with Leia. And like you said, I think you're right. And what the person had said on Twitter is that there is something more that resides within Leia that she does not want to expose. And I think Bloodline with Claudia Gray kind of talks about that. She is the daughter of Vader. People are afraid of that. And
yeah,
it's whether, and they don't know what her potential is. They don't know. It's like we see that in European culture too. When the next heir takes over the throne, and there's a direct relation to the power that be that resided there, and they brought tyranny and they brought pain to the people, or they brought this great misfortune, and that next heir steps into place. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. We didn't like what the first one did. This is not a good idea. That's kind of like what Bloodline outlined.
Yep, that was England in the early 1600s.
Exactly, and that's
James
exactly
Charles the First, Charles the Second,
oh.
James.
The Charles and the Jameses, man. I'm telling you, not you, James.
Whoa, hey.
But
yeah.
But
I came back because my ride is not here, and this conversation was fascinating, so I wanted to come back to do it. And it's too cold to stand outside, so hi. Plus, I wanted to build my U-wing model, so I figured I'd,
Oh, that's perfect then. That's absolutely perfect. But
yeah, start doing that.
There's just so much of a deeper connection with that side of the Force specifically, and it's amazing to see that development is still residing within even the newer sequel trilogy here, and the development between Ben Solo, Rey, that balance of light and dark, and that they both kind of possess that in a way too. And I just cannot wait to see what Episode 9 does, what Master and Apprentice the novel does, and just some more development, James. I feel too, like now that you're back in this, your perspective on this is that I kind of want to see, kind of wrapping into our overall conversation here, what Qui-Gon has taught to Obi-Wan and to others. I want to see that come back to the Force. I want to see that natural perspective on what the Force means come back into fruition.
Oh, absolutely.
So we might have lost Dave's connection there.
David.
David.
Well, we've lost the Branch Davidian.
James, oh James, why would you say such a thing?
Check it out. First S foil in attack position.
Boom. Beautiful.
I haven't done one of these models in forever.
No.
David, are you there, David?
Luckily, this can be audio edited.
Yeah, I heard you there. I was just.
Oh, okay.
Oh, dude, I've tried to behave myself this time. I don't know what Dave's sense of humor is. If I'm going to say something horrifically offensive, and he's going to hate us forever, and I've been tame.
Oh yeah, there's whoa. Yeah, Google is having issues right now. I can't even get into my email. Wonderful. Well, that's okay.
So, Dave, have you listened to the other episodes of the podcast?
I hear something now.
There we go.
There you are.
I don't know what was going on. it just like cut out on me for a second. But in that
All right.
time,
Well, now my ride's here, so now I'm gonna go.
okay.
All right, James.
All right, bye, guys.
See ya.
Bye bye.
Sorry.
Okay.
No, that's okay because I couldn't get into my Gmail for a second there.
Good news. Japan won.
Oh, there we
So,
go. There we go.
yes.
Put a cap
So,
on that. That's awesome.
Yep. Man, that was a tough match. That was a tough match.
What was the final score?
It was 1-0. So Japan
Oof.
had but they had at least 10 shots on goal, and just this keeper on the other side was incredible.
Holy
Kept
cow.
stopping everything. I gotta check the final stats here. So
Yeah.
we had, because it was a penalty,
Uh huh.
how we got the goal. Haraguchi Genki is a really good player. He plays for Hanover in Germany.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He's one of the many Japanese players that plays in the Bundesliga. And so, yeah, we had. No, they didn't do breakdown of all that stuff here, but that's all right. Okay, so now they're pretty much set. They're set for the second round, which is good.
Who are they playing second round? Do you know yet?
I don't know yet. So they got one more group match because in the group stage, each group has 4 teams, so you play 3 matches.
Gotcha.
And the next match is against Uzbekistan. So like people sometimes are like, oh, Asian Cup, it's not that tough. It's actually a lot tougher
Yeah.
than you think. But because there's a lot of good players in Asia, but countries like Uzbekistan aren't going to get many scouts to go look at them.
Right.
Which
Right.
is what, like Oman was pretty impressive. They were really tight in defense.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, so Japan now they got it on TV. So we got 6 points. They've won 2 matches. So each time you get a win, you get 3 points. Uzbekistan is in second place. So that's who Japan faces next. Turkmenistan
Ah.
and Oman. So
Wow.
next match will be 17th, which is Thursday. All right.
I gotta make your calendar. Get that locked in on there.
Yeah, but
That's for sure. Nice. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. No, I think we'll put a wrap here on our episode.
Good. I mean, I was looking at the clock because it's like 12, almost 12:30 here. So
yeah. No, you got to get some rest. Absolutely. So, with anything that we do here on the podcast, here at BrickCityBlockade.com podcast network, at the end of the show, it's a little thing we'd like to call plug time here at the podcast. So, Mr. Dave Hackerson, where can the good people find you across social media?
you can find me on Twitter at NORSKAKIRUNO, Norsk Akiruno, Norsk because all my ancestors came from Norway to the US. Akiruno is where I live in Western Tokyo. And I also do a bilingual blog in Japanese and English. Write about a lot of different things, Japanese influences on Star Wars, Japanese history, art. I'm going to hopefully put something up within this week. I attempted a translation from English into Japanese, which is much harder for me than doing Japanese English, of a song from Native American perspective about
Oh,
their history.
nice.
Because sometimes I get asked about Native Americans and I'm always taken aback because I instantly think like, wow, they feel like white people, like my ancestors killed them all, but they're still alive. But unfortunately, their history, not many people, and most Americans don't know it. So
Yeah.
I'm by no means a spokesman for them, but it's a part of American history I've always been really interested in.
Yeah.
And I do more to educate people outside of America. And so,
oh, that's so cool.
And there's indigenous peoples in Japan as well that finally are going to be recognized as indigenous peoples by law this year.
Oh, that's great.
So, but yeah, that's just some of the stuff my interests are wide and varied. So and that's what I write about on my bilingual blog. So
Oh, that's so cool.
that's people can find. And if you find me on Twitter, there's a link to my blog there. So
Perfect. Make sure to follow him on Twitter. Always a fantastic conversation. You guys can follow me over on Twitter at Mr. Vote Tweets. Check out all my tomfoolery over on Instagram at The Official Vote. www.brickcityblockade.com for everything happening in that galaxy far, far away. Patreon to support the network. Mr. Hackerson, thank you so much, by the way, for your support of Brick City Blockade, my friend. It's absolutely. And make sure to rock the network over on TeePublic. $14 sales happening all across the spring. So make sure to pick up some of your Brick City merchandise and our Galaxy of Joy program brought to you from Starlight Children's Foundation and their friends at Brick City Blockade, bringing smiles to kids' faces across the United States. Thank you guys so much listening here to our Brick City Blockade podcast special with Mr. Dave Hackerson himself. Dave, always an awesome conversation. And as we always say here at the Podcast Network, may the force be with you.